I was pouring coffee at the 24-hour diner when the suit walked in and used my name. 4 months ago. My stepmom said my $850,000 vanished in crypto, leaving me to sleep in my truck during a Texas cold snap. I had a 30-second recording, a piano painted neon pink, and a broken promise. Now, my uncle was here with lawyers and paperwork sharp enough to cut through the lies. My name is Cora Sanders. I returned to the house on a Tuesday. The air in Ridgeview, Texas, already thick and promising a brutal summer. It had been my childhood home, but it was no longer mine. I walked through the oversized oak door without knocking, a small, final act of defiance I allowed myself, and went straight to the dining room. The house was quiet, save for the one sound that defined my entire youth, the heavy, oppressive tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer. It was an antique my father, Daniel Sanders, had cherished. Now, its pendulum swung with a judgmental weight, each thunk landing less like the passage of time and more like a hammer striking a nail. They were already waiting. Catherine Hollis, my stepmother, who insisted everyone call her Cat, sat at the head of the massive walnut table. The table itself was a relic, polished to a mirror shine, and Cat was reflected in it as a sharp, blonde shape. Flanking her, like two bored bodyguards at a committee hearing, were her children. My step-siblings, Brent, on her right, was scrolling through something on his phone with aggressive thumb flicks, his shoulders broad in an expensive polo shirt. On her left was Sloane, head down, blonde hair curtaining her face, lost in her own device. They were a tribunal, and I was the supplicant. The room was cold. Cat kept the air conditioning at a level I always found unnatural, a deliberate, expensive chill against the oppressive June heat outside. It was a statement of control. I sat opposite her, in the chair I used to do my homework in. The walnut felt cold and hard against my forearms. I had requested this meeting. The subject was supposed to be simple, a formality. I was starting my master's program in the fall, and I needed to arrange the first tuition payment and confirm the living stipend from my education fund. Cat laced her fingers on the tabletop. Her rings were new, and one, a large, cushion-cut sapphire, caught the cold light of the chandelier. She smiled, a thin, practiced expression that never reached her eyes. "Cora, thank you for coming," she began, her voice smooth as conditioned air. "I'm glad we're doing this in person. It's a difficult conversation." I waited. The clock thunked in the silence. Brent sighed impatiently. "There's no easy way to say this," Kat continued, leaning forward, performing concern. "The fund? Well, it has severely underperformed." I kept my expression neutral. "Underperformed? How?" "It's the market, sweetie. It's just been brutal." She waved a manicured hand, dismissing the global economy, the crypto crash, the tech stocks. It was a perfect storm. I'm afraid the $30,000 a year living stipend, it's just not there anymore. The principal has been significantly impacted. The cold in the room seemed to find its way inside my veins. I kept my voice perfectly level. My father, Daniel Sanders, was very clear about that fund. Cat, I was there when he structured it. It was $1.5 million. He specified it was to be placed in low-risk, secure investments, bonds, index funds. He hated high-risk portfolios. He said it was enough to see me through my doctorate until I was 28. Kat's smile tightened. She was transitioning from concerned matriarch to financial expert. Daniel was a wonderful man, but he wasn't an investment professional. The market he knew is gone, with inflation. Safe investments are just losing money. I had to adjust the portfolio. I had to be aggressive to protect your principal. "Aggressive," Brent chimed in, not looking up from his phone. "It's called market volatility. Cora, everyone took a hit. It's just how it works." His detachment, his boredom, was a new kind of insult. This was my future he was dismissing between text messages. "I see," I said, the words feeling like ice chips in my mouth. "Then I'll need to see the statements, the quarterly reports for the last 2 years. I'd like to see what this new strategy entailed. The effect was instantaneous. The temperature in the room didn't just drop, it plummeted. The air solidified. Brent's thumb froze over his screen. Kat's artificial smile evaporated, leaving something hard and flat. And Sloane, for the first time since I had entered the room, looked up. Her eyes, wide and suddenly alert, met mine for a single, panicked second before flicking to her mother. She knew. She knew exactly what this was. The silence that followed was absolute. A vacuum where the clock's thunk was the only thing alive. When Kat spoke again, her voice was stripped of all its synthetic warmth. It was flat, cold, and final. "You'll have to talk to the family lawyer." "The family lawyer?" "Alan Dempsey. He has all the paperwork, but I wouldn't recommend it." She picked an invisible piece of lint from her silk blouse. "You have no idea what litigation costs. Any attempt to contest the trust's management will simply eat whatever is left. It would be a waste, for both of us." I stared at her. The family lawyer was Alan Dempsey, the man who played golf with her every Thursday, the man who had restructured my father's entire estate after his death. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat. I understood everything in that moment. This wasn't a market loss. This was a theft. This wasn't negligence. It was a calculated liquidation. I wasn't just being robbed of my education, my stipend, my future. I was being denied the right to even know how it had been done. They had locked the door and were now telling me that trying to find the key would burn the house down. I stood up. The legs of the chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a sound too loud for the room. "I understand," I said. My own voice sounded distant. Kat's smile returned, triumphant this time. "I knew you would. It's disappointing for everyone, Cora, but we all have to adjust." I didn't say goodbye. I turned and walked out of the dining room. The clock thunked at my back. I moved through the foyer, my hand on the doorknob, but something made me pause. A flash of color from the end of the hall, from the music room. It was a garish, impossible color, a neon, highlighter pink. I let my hand fall from the knob and walked toward it, feeling like I was moving through water. The music room doors were open. I stopped in the doorway. It was my mother's piano, a Steinway, the one she had played every single night, the one I had learned on, my small hands next to hers. It had been a classic, gleaming ebony, the black lacquer so deep you could see your reflection in it. Now, it was covered in a thick, sticky-looking coat of neon pink paint. The paint was sloppy, dripping in places near the legs, and stuck to its surface, like cheap bandages, were vinyl decals. "Good vibes only. Boss babe. Hustle." I felt my stomach clench so hard I thought I would be sick. I reached out and touched a key, a flat, dead clack. The strings were probably ruined from the paint. Cute, right? Sloane's voice came from behind me. I turned. She was leaning against the doorframe, finally off her phone, a vapid smile on her face. "It really brightens up the room," she said, walking past me to admire her work. "It's for my Instagram aesthetic. That old black was just so boring, depressing." "You painted it," I said. My voice was hollow. "Totally." She ran her hand over the "Good Vibes Only" sticker, her acrylic nails clicking on the vinyl. "It was a ton of work. Actually, I had to sand off all that old black lacquer first to make the pink pop. It took forever." She sanded it. She had taken sandpaper to my mother's memory. She had methodically, cheerfully, scraped away the finish, the history, the last tangible piece of her, all for a social media backdrop. I looked from the desecrated piano to Sloane's proud, empty face. The thunk of the clock echoed down the hall. This was not a financial dispute. This was an erasure. The theft of the money was just the mechanism. The real goal was this: to sandblast my mother's legacy and my father's promises from this house, leaving nothing behind but their own cheap, bright, empty victories. I turned and walked out the front door. I didn't run. I walked, each step deliberate. I got into my old Ford Ranger. the engine turning over with a tired rumble. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I was not just leaving a house. I was leaving the scene of a crime, and I was the only one who knew it. 2 days later, I came back. I parked the Ford Ranger 3 streets over, in front of a house with an overgrown lawn and a rusted-out sedan on blocks. I waited until 11:04 a.m. Kat had her standing Pilates class at 11. Brent would be at the gym, and Sloan would be wherever people with no jobs went on a Thursday morning. I walked the blocks back, the Texas sun already a physical weight on my shoulders. My baseball cap was pulled low, and I felt like a burglar in my own life. The old key was still there, under the loose flagstone by the hydrangeas. The stone felt cool and damp underneath. The key itself was brass, worn smooth. My father had given it to me when I was 13. "In case you ever forget yours," he'd said. I'd never returned it. The lock clicked, a sound so loud it seemed to echo in the empty street. I slipped inside. The house was cold, the air conditioning humming its low, artificial drone. The grandfather clock thunked from the foyer. A mechanical heartbeat measuring my intrusion. I froze, listening. Nothing, just the hum, the clock, and the distant sound of a pool filter kicking on in the backyard. I didn't go toward the main living area. I went to the narrow service staircase hidden behind a paneled door in the mudroom. This was the back way, the servant's way from a different era, and it led directly to the 3rd floor. The stairs were uncarpeted, wooden, and steep. I moved slowly, testing each step with my toe before committing my weight, my sneakers silent on the wood. The door at the top opened into a short hallway, and then, up another half flight, was the door to the attic. It was a place I had always loved, my true sanctuary. It was where my father had kept his old drafting table and where my mother had stored her off-season clothes in cedar chests. It smelled of old wood, paper, and time. I pushed the door open. A wave of suffocating heat hit me. Unlike the rest of the house, the attic wasn't zoned for the main AC. The air was thick, still, and baked by the June sun pounding on the roof shingles. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from a circular window at the far end. The space was vast, a landscape of forgotten furniture shrouded in white sheets, looking like a graveyard for a former life. I was here for one thing, one box. I navigated the maze of shrouded shapes, my feet quiet on the wide plank floors. In the far corner, behind a rolled-up Persian rug, was a stack of trunks. One was a small, dark cherry wood box, my mother's. I knelt, my knees cracking in the silence, and lifted the lid. The smell of cedar and faint perfume rose up, a ghostly greeting. Inside were the things Kat hadn't understood, the things Sloan would never find aesthetic. A stack of my mother's letters to my father, tied in a faded blue ribbon, a pair of her tortoiseshell reading glasses, a pressed magnolia blossom from their wedding, now the color of old tea, a photograph of the two of us at the piano, my hands ridiculously small on the keys. This was what I had come for. This was the proof I had existed here, that we had existed. I was carefully lifting the bundle of letters when my foot shifted. The floorboard beneath me groaned. It wasn't a loud sound, but in the absolute stillness, it felt like a gunshot. My blood turned to ice. I held my breath, my entire body rigid, listening. Silence. Then, from directly below me, from Kat's home office, located on the 2nd floor, a voice. "I'm telling you, it's handled." Kat's voice, but it was different. It was loud, tinny, and slightly distorted. She was on speakerphone. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was afraid she would hear it. I stayed perfectly still, crouched over the open box, the scent of cedar filling my lungs. Another voice, thinner and metallic, from the phone. "Brent. Handled?" She asked for statements. "Mom, she's not stupid." "She's emotional," Kat's voice replied, dismissive and clear. The sound traveled perfectly up the old ventilation shaft that ran near the wall. "She's upset about the stipend. She's not thinking about the principal. She's not thinking about corporate structure. A pause. I heard the click, click, click of Kat typing on her keyboard. She doesn't need to know the specifics, Kat continued, her voice bored. The fund was a lifesaver. Aurora Meridian Capital would never have gotten off the ground without that seed money. That $700,000 was the only way to get the other partners to buy in. I felt the blood drain from my face. $700,000, not a market loss, a transfer, seed money, for her company, Aurora Meridian Capital. I repeated the name in my head, burning it into my memory. Yeah, but what if she talks to a lawyer? Brent pressed, his voice tight with a whine of anxiety. What if she somehow gets a look at the trust documents? Daniel's low-risk clause. Daniel is gone, Kat snapped, the boredom vanishing, replaced by a blade. And by the time Cora turns 28, the trust will be dissolved, the assets will be fully integrated, and it will all be done. There will be nothing left for a lawyer to find. She'll get a final distribution of whatever's left, a few thousand. She'll think the market just had a bad decade. By the time I was 28, the exact date my father's trust was set to expire, this wasn't a panic move. This was a 5-year plan. My hand, shaking so violently I could barely control it, moved to the pocket of my jeans. I pulled out my phone. The screen flared to life, momentarily blinding me in the dim attic. My thumb fumbled on the glass, slick with sweat. I found the voice memo app. I tapped it. The red record icon appeared. I held my breath, aiming the phone's microphone toward the floorboards, praying the sound of my own pulse wasn't loud enough to be heard. I don't know, Brent was saying. It feels risky. What's risky? Kat said, her voice dropping to a low, cold lecture. Is having nearly $1 million sitting in a fund for a girl who doesn't appreciate it, while we are trying to build an empire. Stop worrying. She'll get her master's. She'll get a job. She'll be fine. She's resilient. The word resilient was a curse. It was the excuse she used to justify the theft. There was more clicking from her keyboard. Now, I need you to do something. Go into the main file cabinet. I need the insurance paperwork for the house assets. Specifically, I need the appraisal documents for the Steinway. My stomach hollowed out. The pink thing? Brent asked, confused. Why? Because, Kat said, with the strained patience of someone explaining a simple concept to a child. I'm listing it as a corporate asset. It can be collateral for the new bridge loan. I don't care what color it is. It's still appraised at over 6 figures. Find the papers. I want them on my desk by tonight. It wasn't enough to steal the fund. It wasn't enough to destroy the piano. She was going to leverage the wreckage. She was going to take the violated memory of my mother and use it to fund her next venture. The greed was bottomless. It went beyond adjustment, beyond theft. It was a pathological consumption of our entire history. The call ended. I heard the digital beep of the disconnection, followed by the soft sound of Kat's office chair rolling across the hardwood floor. Then, her footsteps, fading down the hallway. I didn't move. I stayed kneeling in the oppressive 90-degree heat, my hand holding the phone, the recorder still silently capturing the attic's thick, hot silence. The thunk of the grandfather clock 2 floors below was the only sound. Finally, I pressed stop. I saved the file, renaming it with a random string of letters and numbers. My hands were steady now. The shaking was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy calm that settled in my chest. I placed the bundle of letters back in the box and closed the lid. I wouldn't take them. I couldn't. If the house was stripped, they'd know I'd been there. I could take nothing. I stood up, my joints aching. I needed to see my own face. There was a small, dusty powder room off the attic, a relic from a time when the space had been a full guest suite. I pushed the door open. The air inside was even more stale. I turned the brass tap, a rusty spurt of water, then a weak, lukewarm stream. I cupped my hands, splashed the water on my face. It did nothing to cut the grime or the heat. I looked up. The mirror was filmed with dust. I wiped a circle clean with the sleeve of my t-shirt. The girl who stared back at me was someone I barely recognized. Her eyes weren't panicked. They weren't sad. They were hard. They were the eyes of someone who had just been given a death sentence and a weapon all at the same time. The grief was gone, burned away by the white-hot clarity of the betrayal. I checked my pocket. The phone was there. The recording was safe. I checked my bank account app. $417.32. My apartment rent was due in a week. The truth was simple. I was on my own. No one was coming to save me because no one knew. I left the attic, closing the door with a soft click. I retraced my steps down the service stairs, my feet making no sound. I let myself out the side door, locking it behind me. I dropped the key back under the flagstone, wiping my prints from it with the hem of my shirt. I walked the 3 blocks to my truck. The cab was an oven, the steering wheel too hot to touch. I sat there, the heat pressing in, not turning on the engine. This was not the time for confrontation. Kat thought I was emotional. She thought I was weak. She thought I would be resilient. She was counting on me to grieve, to be angry, and then to give up. A direct assault would fail. I had $400 and a voice memo against her $700,000 and a team of lawyers. The plan had to change. This was no longer about getting my money back. It was about survival. I needed to gather more evidence. I needed to become invisible. My emotions, my anger, my heartbreak, they were liabilities. They had to be hidden, buried deep under the ice that was forming in my veins. I put the key in the ignition. The old Ford Ranger rumbled to life. The survival campaign had begun. I didn't have a lease to break. I just had to be out by the first. I used the last of my $417.32 to pay the final utility bill, buy a cheap foam mattress topper, and fill the tank of the Ranger. I drove away from the apartment complex with everything I owned fitting into 2 duffel bags and a backpack in the truck bed. That first night, I parked in the back corner of the 24-hour Walmart lot. Under the glare of a security light, I felt skinned, exposed. Every car that pulled in, every person walking by, felt like a threat. I cut the foam topper with a utility knife to fit the extended cab's small floor space, wedging it behind the seats. It was cramped, my knees practically touching my chest. Sleep was impossible. The next day brought the first practical problem. Hygiene. I couldn't work 3 jobs smelling like I lived in a truck. The solution was $10 a month. I walked into the local Planet Fitness, the purple and yellow interior an assault on my already frayed nerves. The judgment-free zone slogan felt like a personal attack. The girl at the desk was cheerful. "Welcome. Just working out today?" "I'd like to sign up," I said, my voice flat. $10 and a few signatures later, I had a key tag. This flimsy piece of plastic was my new lease. The locker room was clean, bright, and blessedly empty at 2 p.m. I stood under the hot water of the shower for 20 minutes, the steam stinging my eyes, and tried not to sob. This $10 membership was my rent. This was my bathroom, my shower, my sink. I established the rotation immediately. It was a strategy, a game to avoid being noticed. One night at the Walmart, the next at the Home Depot. Parked near the contractor vans, the third at the 24-hour Kroger. Near the cart returns. Never the same lot twice in a row. Always arrive late, leave early. I kept a sunshade in the windshield at all times, a silver barrier that said, "Empty car, not sleeping person." The money was disappearing. I needed work, I needed cash, and I needed it fast. My first job was at Dawnline Roasters. The shift started at 4 a.m. My phone alarm, set to vibrate only, would jolt me awake at 3:30 in the cold. Damp cab. I'd drive to the Planet Fitness, change into my black polo and khakis in a bathroom stall, brush my teeth at the sink, and pull my hair into a tight bun. I'd be at Dawnline by 3:55, the sky still a bruised purple. My manager was a man named Dennis. He was all size and thin, gray hair. He'd grunt as I walked in. "Sanders, milk's low, stock it." "Yes, sir." The work was mechanical, frantic, grinding beans, pulling espresso shots, steaming milk, my hands moving in a blur. The 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. shift was a rush of commuters, all of them awake, clean, and complaining about the $5 cost of their lattes. I'd hand them their cups, my smile a tight, aching mask, and say, "Have a great day." My second job was the cruelest irony, from the public library, or sometimes from the cab of my truck using my phone's hotspot. I was an online tutor. My subject, basic economics, 3 afternoons a week. I'd sit there, my voice academic and clear, explaining scarcity, asset allocation, and opportunity cost to freshmen who were paying for a class they didn't want to take. I was teaching the principles of a world I was no longer a part of. My entire net worth a half tank of gas and the change in my pocket. My third job was the one that kept me alive. The night shift at the Bluebird Diner, from 6 p.m. to midnight. It was a different kind of tired. The air was thick with the smell of grease and old coffee. My feet, already aching from the morning shift, would scream in my cheap sneakers. The head cook was a large man named Jerry, with a tattooed forearm and a permanently stained apron. He ran the kitchen with a gruff efficiency. "Order up, Cora. Watch the plate. It's hot." "Got it, Jerry." "Hands. I need hands on table 4. At the end of my first shift, as I was wiping down the chrome counters, he slid a paper-wrapped bundle across the pass. "Mistake," he mumbled, not looking at me. "Made an extra burger. Fries are from a misfire. You want it or it goes in the trash." I looked at the grease-stained paper. It was the first real food I'd smelled in days. My stomach clenched. "I'll take it, Jerry. Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just trash it if you don't want it." I ate it in my truck in the Kroger parking lot, the burger and fries tasting like salvation. Jerry made a mistake almost every night I worked. I was a ghost, but a ghost needs a mailing address. I couldn't have paychecks or bank statements sent to a parking lot. I had one friend I trusted, Olivia Carr. We'd been in the same study groups in undergrad. I called her and asked her to meet for coffee. I used 20 minutes of my library time to find a neutral coffee shop, not Dawnline. She hugged me, then pulled back, her face concerned. "Cora, are you okay? You look exhausted." The lie I'd prepared felt like gravel in my mouth. "I'm fine. Liv, just a nightmare with my new apartment. It's got this awful black mold problem. They're having to remediate the whole building. It's a mess." "Oh my God, that's terrible. Where are you staying?" "A cheap motel for now. It's fine. But the mail? Liv, this is a huge ask, but could I possibly use your address? Just for a few weeks? For my paychecks and bank stuff? Until this mold thing is sorted?" "Of course," she said instantly, her relief at having a solvable problem obvious. "God, yes, anything you need." The guilt was a physical weight, but it was necessary. My new life was measured by new clocks. The old heavy thunk of the grandfather clock was replaced by the throbbing ache in my lower back from the truck's floor. It was measured by the dark, bruised circles under my eyes when I faced myself in the Planet Fitness mirror. It was measured by the small, blistering burn on my forearm, where a jet of steam from the Dawnline espresso machine had caught me. I'd run it under cold water for 30 seconds and kept working. There was no time for injury. That recording on my phone was my only weapon. It couldn't just live there. At the library, I created 3 new, anonymous cloud accounts. I uploaded the 30-second audio file. I renamed them. One was Geology Midterm Notes. One was Receipts 2019. The last was Vacation Pics Backup. They were safe, redundant, hidden. In a spiral notebook I'd bought at Walmart, I started the journal. I was turning my emotions into evidence. Every entry was cold, factual. June 12th, 2:15 p.m. Meeting with K. Hollis, B. Hollis, S. Hollis, claimed fund, underperformed, due to crypto/tech, refused to provide statements, threatened litigation costs, June 14th, approx. 11:10 a.m. Audio file, 1 captured, confirmed $700K, transfer to Aurora Meridian Capital as seed money, confirmed intent to list Steinway Piano as corporate asset, June 19th. Contacted by Kat via text. Thinking of you. Hope you're not struggling too much. I screenshotted the text and uploaded it. Every word of false concern was another nail. My first paycheck from the Bluebird cleared. $350. I cashed it. The crisp bills in my hand feeling heavier than they had any right to. I went into the Kroger, the one I was sleeping behind, and I bought a rotisserie chicken, a bag of mixed salad greens, and a crisp green apple. I sat in the cab of my truck and ate the entire chicken with my hands, the hot, salty meat a shock to my system. The relief was so profound I choked on it. Then the cold snap came. It was late in the season, a freak northern front that plunged the Texas nights into the low 40s. It found every gap in the Rangers' door seals. I woke up at 2 a.m., shivering so violently my teeth chattered. I was wrapped in every piece of clothing I owned, my uniforms, my jeans, my towels. It wasn't enough. I turned the key, desperate for the heater. The engine rumbled to life. I cranked the fan to high, a clunk from deep in the dashboard, and then, nothing. The fan blew, but the air was as cold as the air outside. The heater core was dead. I couldn't afford to fix it. I sat there, my hands jammed in my armpits, watching my own breath fog up the cab. The shivering wouldn't stop. It was a deep, internal quake. By 3 a.m., the shivers were different. They were ragged. My head began to pound, a dull throb that matched the burn on my arm. By 3:30, my alarm vibrated. I couldn't move to turn it off. A wave of nausea and heat washed over me. Even as I shivered, I was sick. I was really sick. The cold, the exhaustion, the stress. It had all found a way in. This is how it ends, I thought, a strange, detached calm settling over me. Not in a courtroom, in the back of a Kroger parking lot, in a truck with a broken heater. My fingers were numb, stiff. I fumbled for the phone. I had one call, one person who thought I was in a motel. I dialed. It rang twice. Cora? Olivia's voice was thick with sleep. It's 4 a.m. What's wrong? My voice was a raw croak. I could barely form the words. Liv, I'm at the Kroger, on Main Street. What? The Kroger? Cora, you sound awful. I'm in my truck, I whispered. The admission cost me everything. I'm in my truck. I'm so cold. I think I'm really sick. The line was silent for a second. You're in your truck? Please, Liv, I can't get warm. Stay there. Don't move. I'm coming. I'm coming right now. I don't know how long it was. 10 minutes? 15? It felt like an hour. I was fading. The pounding in my head drowning out the shivering. Then, headlights slashed across my windshield, blinding me. A car door slammed. My truck door was yanked open. Olivia stood there, in flannel pajama pants and a coat, her face pale with terror and confusion. The cold night air hit me, and I tried to shrink away. Oh my God, she whispered, seeing the foam mattress, the duffel bags, the empty chicken container. Cora, you're living in here. She didn't wait for an answer. She unbuckled my seatbelt, which I'd fastened for some imagined warmth. She grabbed my arm. Come on, get out now. I half fell, half crawled out of the cab. My legs wouldn't hold me. She caught me, her small frame straining under my weight. She dragged me to her little sedan, the engine roaring, the heater already blasting. She shoved me into the passenger seat and wrapped a blanket from her back seat around me. The hot air felt like needles on my frozen skin. Liv, I managed. Don't talk, she commanded, her voice shaking with a fury I'd never heard. We're going to my place, and you are going to tell me exactly what the hell is going on. As she pulled out of the parking lot, the first gray light of dawn was breaking. My alarm for the dawn line shift I was missing was still vibrating, a frantic, insistent buzz. In the pocket of the door I'd left open, Olivia's apartment was a cramped studio on the 3rd floor, smelling of turpentine, old books, and strong coffee. It was the safest place on earth. She didn't press me, didn't smother me with questions. She just acted. She pointed to her tiny bathroom. "Shower," she ordered, her voice still rough with sleep and anger. "As hot as you can stand. Use any of my stuff." While the hot water was sluicing the grime and the cold sweat of the truck from my skin, I heard her pulling things from her closet. When I emerged, wrapped in a towel that smelled like her laundry detergent, she had transformed the sofa. She had piled it with every blanket and pillow she owned. It looked like a nest. She pushed 2 Tylenol into my palm. "You're burning up. Take these." I swallowed them, my throat raw. I sat on the edge of the sofa, and the softness of the cushions was so foreign I almost cried. "Liv, Lie down, Cora," she said, pulling a heavy quilt over me. "Sleep. We'll talk in the morning." I collapsed. I didn't dream of the clock, or the truck, or the cold. For the first time in weeks, I didn't dream at all. I just fell into a deep, dark, healing black. I woke to daylight streaming through the blinds and the smell of real food. Not diner grease, not burnt coffee beans, but ginger and chicken broth. I sat up too fast, and the room spun. "Easy." Olivia was in the armchair opposite me, her knees drawn to her chest, a mug cradled in her hands. She had clearly been awake for hours, watching me. Her eyes were red-rimmed but sharp. She handed me a different mug, filled with steaming soup. "Drink this. It's all my mom ever made when I was sick." It was practical. It was not pity. It was the most profound act of care I had experienced since my father died. I drank it slowly, the hot liquid feeling like life itself returning to my raw throat. When the mug was empty, I set it down on the floor. "Okay," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "You're not in a motel. You're not handling a mold problem. You look like you've been through a war. You're going to tell me what happened, the real story, Cora, all of it." And so I did. The words came out, not in an emotional rush, but in a flat, cold, factual report. The meeting in the chilled dining room, the market volatility, the neon pink Steinway, desecrated with stickers, the attic, the heat, the floorboard creaking, the speakerphone call, Aurora Meridian Capital, the $700,000, stolen, not lost, the plan to leverage the ruined piano as a corporate asset. I told her about the $10 gym membership that had become my lifeline, the 3-job rotation, the parking lot strategy, the irony of tutoring economics while being destitute, Jerry's mistake burgers, the constant, gnawing exhaustion, and finally, the broken heater core and the freight train shivering that had finally broken me. When I finished, the silence in the small apartment was absolute, broken only by a distant siren. Olivia hadn't moved. She just stared at her empty mug, her knuckles white. I had expected shock, or tears, or even pity. What I got was a cold, quiet rage that was almost terrifying. "That bitch," she whispered, the word a small, hard stone in the air. "That absolute, calculating monster." She stood up, not looking at me, and began to pace the 3 steps her floor space allowed. "To do that, to take your money, and then to paint the piano." She stopped, her back to me. Then she turned, and her eyes were clear. The fury had settled into a kind of diamond-hard resolve. "Okay, here's what's happening. First, you are not sleeping in that truck again. Do you understand me? You're not going back to the parking lots. You're staying here. You take the sofa. It's yours until this is over. That is not a request, and I am not taking no for an answer." The relief that washed over me was so profound it made me lightheaded. "Liv, I don't have rent." "If you mention money," she said, her voice sharp, "I will be furious. You do it for me. This is what we're doing. This is settled." That night, lying on the sofa, secure under a real roof, my brain finally began to function again. For weeks, it had been locked in a low-level panic, focused only on the next hour. Where do I park? When can I shower? How long until my shift? The fever had broken, and with it, the mental fog. The girl who had crouched in the attic, the girl who had recorded the theft, was back. The next day, while Olivia was at her design internship, I went to work. Not the diner, not the coffee shop, my real work. I took my laptop to the university library. Safety first. I created a new, encrypted partition on my hard drive. I created 2 more anonymous cloud accounts under false names. I uploaded the audio file and the journal of evidence to all of them, burying them in folders marked poli-sci readings and art history slides. I bought a new, high-capacity flash drive, encrypted it, and transferred everything there as well. I changed every password I had to complex, randomized strings of characters. I was building a digital fortress. Then I bought a new spiral notebook. My first one was compromised by the desperation of the truck. This one would be different. I opened to the first page and wrote, July 5th. Survival phase is over. Justice phase begins. My strategy solidified. Kat thought I was weak. She thought I was a grieving, emotional girl who would be resilient and just disappear. My silence, my complete disappearance from her life, would be my greatest weapon. Let her think I'd crawled away defeated. Let her get comfortable. Let her get arrogant. Arrogant people make mistakes. They get sloppy. They stop covering their tracks. I would not call. I would not text. I would not give her the satisfaction of an angry confrontation, which is exactly what she expected. I uncapped a red pen. On the inside cover of the new notebook, I wrote a single rule, a line I would not cross. Confront them with the system, not with an explosion. An explosion would destroy me. The system, if I navigated it correctly, would destroy her. But the system required lawyers, and lawyers required money. I had none. I logged into my old university email. I sent 3 carefully worded messages to old classmates from my undergraduate economics program, people who were now in their 2nd year of law school. I didn't give details. I framed it as a research question. Hi, hope you're well. Quick question. I'm helping a friend with a complex family trust issue. Do you know of any top-tier litigation firms in Texas that specialize in breach of fiduciary duty or forensic accounting? Especially any that might consider a contingency basis for a very strong case. The replies trickled in over the next few days. A list of names, law firms. I spent hours in the library, cross-referencing them, reading about their partners, their case histories. I was learning a new language. Fiduciary malfeasance, willful misconduct, unjust enrichment. I kept my jobs. I needed every penny, but my purpose had changed. I was no longer just earning money to eat. I was building a war chest, even if it was just a few $100s at a time. I also started my documentation. I saved every pay stub from Dawnline and the Bluebird. I printed out my work schedules. I was creating an irrefutable paper trail of my hardship, a direct contradiction to the life Kat had stolen. I learned to mask the exhaustion. I used a little of Olivia's concealer under my eyes. I practiced a brighter, welcome to the Bluebird. I became a better actor, hiding the single-minded focus under a veneer of a normal, tired student. The hardest part was the piano, the neon pink, the good vibes only sticker. Haunted my sleep. It was an act of erasure, and it had almost worked. My hands, calloused and sore from the espresso machine and carrying heavy plates, felt stiff, alien. I took $80 from my tips and went to a pawn shop. I bought a cheap, 49-key electric keyboard. The keys were plastic and unweighted, and the high C note stuck. I set it up in the corner of Olivia's apartment. Every night, after my shift at the diner, I would plug in the headphones. I'd sit on the floor in the dark, the apartment lit only by the streetlights outside, and I would play. I played scales, my fingers clumsy and slow, rebuilding the connections. I played Bach inventions, the intricate logic a comfort. I played the melody of the nocturne my mother had loved, the notes tinny and pathetic in the cheap headphones. It didn't matter. I wasn't playing for an audience. I was refusing to let them take this, too. I was keeping the memory in my muscles. It was a small, silent act of defiance, every single night. One night, after a brutal double shift that ended at midnight, I came back to the apartment, my feet throbbing, my back on fire. The keyboard in the corner looked impossible. The legal research felt like screaming into a void. The sheer scale of what I was facing, Kat's wealth, her lawyers, her audacity, pressed down on me, and I felt the truck's cold seeping back into my bones. I couldn't practice. Instead, I opened my journal. I turned to the very last page. I started a letter. Dear Cora, I wrote, I don't know when you'll read this, 10 years from now, maybe, but I need you to remember, you are not the girl in the Planet Fitness shower. You are not the girl eating mistake burgers in a parking lot. You are Daniel Sanders' daughter. You are the hands that your mother taught to play. You were betrayed, but you will not be broken. You will be smart, and you will be patient, and you will take back every single thing that was stolen from you, and you will not, ever, let this make you cruel. You will not become them. Remember this. Remember. I folded the page over, sealing it. It was an anchor, a promise to my future self that I would not drown. The week settled into a new, grinding rhythm. Wake at 5 a.m. on the sofa, drive to Dawnline, library for research, online tutoring, drive to the Bluebird, serve, smile, clean, home by midnight 30, practice piano with the headphones, sleep, repeat. It was a machine, and I was its engine. I was surviving, but this time, it was survival with a purpose. Then, one night, the rhythm broke. It was a dead quiet Tuesday, 3 a.m. at the Bluebird Diner. The air was still, thick with the smell of stale coffee. I was the only one on shift, wiping down the chrome counters, waiting for the sun to rise. Jerry, the cook, was half asleep on a stool in the kitchen, reading a fishing magazine. The bell over the front door chimed. The sound was sharp, violent in the silence. I looked up, rag in hand. A man was standing just inside the doorway, shaking rain from a dark, impeccably tailored suit. He didn't belong. He was a creature from a different world, dropped into this vinyl and linoleum box. He looked around, his eyes scanning the empty booths, looking confused, maybe lost. Then his eyes landed on me. He froze. I froze, too. My breath caught. The rag in my hand slipped, hitting the counter with a wet sound. He took a step forward, into the weak fluorescent light. My heart stopped. I knew that face. I hadn't seen it in 6 years. Not since the day of my father's funeral, when he had stood by the grave, his face like stone. He stared at me, at my cheap blue uniform, at the name Cora, embroidered in white script over my heart. Cora? He asked. His voice was just as I remembered it, deep, quiet, and carrying an authority I'd forgotten existed. Cora Sanders? The bell above the door was still sending out a faint, high-pitched vibration, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that the door to the rest of my life had just been kicked open. The Bluebird Diner was a pocket of stillness at 3 a.m. The rain had stopped, but the parking lot asphalt gleamed wet under the red neon open sign. Inside, the only sounds were the low buzz of the fluorescent lights over the kitchen pass and the hum of the ancient beverage cooler. The vinyl booths were empty, their red cushions cracked and gleaming. I was at the counter, methodically refilling salt shakers, my movements slow, lost in the grinding exhaustion of a double shift. The bell over the door shattered the quiet. I flinched, my hand tightening on the metal shaker. I looked up, my practiced diner smile already forming. It died on my lips. The man standing just inside the doorway was an apparition. He wore a dark gray suit, impeccably tailored, the kind that cost more than my truck. Raindrops glistened on the shoulders. He didn't belong in a place of linoleum floors and laminated menus. He looked like he had walked out of a high-rise boardroom and taken a wrong turn into my specific, greasy reality. He moved with a silent, measured confidence, his leather shoes making almost no sound on the checkered floor. He didn't look at the menu board. He sat at the counter, 3 stools down, and placed his hands flat on the formica. "Coffee?" he said. His voice was deep, quiet, and scraped against the silence. "Black." "Coming right up," I said, my voice hoarse. I grabbed one of the heavy ceramic mugs, my hand sliding under the counter for the pot, as I poured the steaming, burnt-smelling coffee. I caught his reflection in the chrome siding of the espresso machine I never used. He wasn't looking around. He was staring directly at me. I slid the mug across the counter, the ceramic scraping. "That'll be $1, sir." He didn't reach for his wallet. He just watched me, his gaze analytical, uncomfortably familiar. He was taking in the cheap, pill-blue polyester uniform, the name Cora stitched in white thread over my heart, the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Cora? The word hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't the way a customer would read my name tag. He said it with an intonation, a specific cadence I hadn't heard in 6 years. It was the sound of my mother's house. It was the sound of a life before the cold dining room, before the neon-pink piano. I froze, my hand still resting on the counter. "Cora Sanders," he said again, a statement this time, not a question. My breath hitched. I looked at him, really looked past the suit and the rain. The face was older, carved with lines of stress and authority. The hair at his temples was a sharp, striking silver, but the eyes, they were intelligent, piercing, and they were my mother's eyes. "Rowan?" I whispered the name. It felt alien on my tongue, a relic from a buried civilization. Rowan Whitaker, my maternal uncle, my mother's older brother, the man who had been a ghost in my life even before she died, and who had vanished completely after a quiet, vicious argument with my father by the graveside. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure. You look—" He stopped, his gaze dropping to the faint grease stain on my apron. "Different." "What are you doing here?" My voice was sharp, brittle. The shock was fading, replaced by a surge of defensive adrenaline. Relief and suspicion were at war in my chest. This man had been gone. He had left. "I'm in town for the Summit Tech Expo," he said, his voice level, gesturing vaguely toward the cluster of glass towers downtown, a different universe from here. "I've been trying to find you, Cora, for weeks." I said nothing, just gripped the edge of the counter. "Your old cell number is disconnected," he continued, as if reciting a report. "The apartment you had listed with the university registrar, you're not there. You've taken a leave of absence from your master's program." "I moved," I said stiffly. "I live in a Walmart parking lot. I shower at a $10 gym." "So it seems." His gaze was heavy, unrelenting. He took a sip of the coffee and barely grimaced at the taste. "I had to call in a marker with an old colleague of your father's. It took him 2 weeks to find out you'd taken a job at a place called Dawnline Roasters. I went there. The manager, Dennis, said you'd quit." "I didn't quit," I snapped. "I was transferred. I work here now. The night shift." 3 a.m., he said it flatly. "Working in a diner." He looked around, at the empty booths, the flickering light. "What happened? Cora, what is going on?" I felt a hysterical laugh bubble in my throat. What happened? "I'm working," I said, the words like stones. I grabbed my cleaning rag, turning away from him to wipe down the already clean counter. "It's a job. I have to work. My shift isn't over." I glanced at the clock on the wall. 3:07 a.m. I had 2 more hours until my shift ended at 5. 2 more hours of this man staring at me, bringing the entire past crashing into the fragile, desperate present I had built. I felt myself oscillating, vibrating between the urge to run out the door and a primal, childish longing to just collapse. "I see." Rowan looked at the clock, then back at me. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit coat. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, and from it, he extracted a single bill. He laid it on the counter, sliding it under the coffee mug. It was a $100 bill. "The coffee is $1, I said, my voice dead. I'll be in the parking lot. A black Mercedes. He stood up. The motion fluid. He hadn't finished the coffee. Your shift ends at 5. I have to clean. You'll wait, he interrupted. His voice not unkind, but absolute. It was the voice of a man who had not been successfully argued with in a very long time. And when you're done, you will come with me. He turned and walked out. The bell chimed, a small, bright sound in his wake. I was left alone in the fluorescent hum, staring at the $100 bill. The next 2 hours were a fever dream. I mopped the floors, scrubbed the grill, and restocked the napkin dispensers. My body was on autopilot, but my mind was screaming, Rowan, here, why? After 6 years of absolute silence, why now? The questions beat against my skull, matching the throbbing in my feet. At exactly 4:58 a.m., I clocked out, I ripped my apron off, balled it up, and threw it in the dirty linen bin. I didn't wait for the morning shift to arrive. I grabbed my backpack from the hook, shoved the $100 bill into my pocket, and pushed through the glass door. The air was cold, damp, and tasted like the city before dawn. The black S-Class was parked at the far edge of the lot, a sleek, dark shadow. It was idling, the engine a faint, powerful purr. It was the quietest car I had ever heard. I walked toward it, my sneakers squeaking on the wet pavement. I felt like I was walking toward my own execution, or my own rescue. I couldn't tell which. I pulled the handle. The door was heavy, solid. It opened with a muted, expensive sound. I slid into the passenger seat. The interior was a shock. It was warm, deep, penetrating warmth from a heating system that actually worked. The air smelled of clean, rich leather, and something vaguely like cedar. It was the smell of money, of a life I had forgotten. Rowan put the car in gear. He didn't ask where to. He didn't ask where I lived. He just drove. We moved silently through the sleeping city, past the Home Pro, past the 24-hour Kroger, my parking spots, my rotation. We drove downtown, the buildings growing taller, the glass and steel reflecting the first hint of gray light in the east. He pulled into the covered entrance of the Rook House. A man in a long wool coat and a top hat immediately moved to open Rowan's door. I can't go in there, I whispered, horrified. I was in my diner uniform. I smelled like onions and old coffee. My hair was matted in its tight, greasy bun. Rowan just looked at me. Yes, you can. You're with me. He got out. The doorman opened my door. I felt a blush of shame so hot it made my skin prickle. I got out. I followed him, my backpack slung over one shoulder, my cheap sneakers silent on the polished marble floor. The lobby was vast, quiet, and smelled faintly of lilies. We were reflected in the polished walls, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, and a girl who looked like a ghost haunting him. The elevator ride was silent. The walls were mirrored brass. I couldn't look at myself. I saw my reflection and saw a stranger. The hollows under my eyes were dark, bruised sockets. My skin was pale. My lips chapped. I looked broken. The suite was on the 22nd floor. It was dark, vast, and a floor-to-ceiling window looked out over the entire city, a carpet of lights blinking awake. Rowan set his room key on a polished wood desk. He didn't turn on the lights. He just turned to me. In there. He pointed to a door. Is a bathroom. Take a shower. As long as you need. There's a robe. As I moved toward the door, my legs feeling wooden, he picked up the phone by the bed. I'm ordering room service, he said. Not to me, but to the room. I'm not hungry, I lied, my stomach churning with acid and shame. Yes, you are. He was already dialing. I'm ordering one of everything. The bathroom was bigger than Olivia's entire apartment. It was all white marble and gleaming chrome. I locked the door, a reflex. I turned on the shower, and the water that blasted from the wall was immediate and scalding. I stepped under it, still in my uniform. I tore the clothes off, letting them fall to the floor in a soaked, sad pile. I stood under the water until the steam was so thick I couldn't see the door. I used the tiny, expensive-smelling soap and scrubbed my skin until it was raw. I was washing off more than just the diner. I was washing off the Planet Fitness shower stalls, the cold water sponge baths in the truck, the smell of my own fear. I washed my hair twice. I found the robe. It was thick, white, and impossibly soft. I wrapped it around myself, tying the belt tight. It felt like armor. When I stepped out, the room was glowing with the soft light of the lamps. A large rolling cart was positioned in front of the window, covered in silver-domed plates and white linen. Rowan was sitting in an armchair, a cup of coffee, real coffee, in his hand. He looked up, and his expression was, for the first time, not hard. It was pained. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I sat. He lifted the silver domes, eggs Benedict, smoked salmon, a bowl of fruit so bright it looked fake, berries, melon, pineapple, a basket of pastries, a plate of bacon. I stared. It was a feast. It was more real food than I had seen in one place in months. "Eat, Cora." My hand was shaking as I picked up the fork. I took a bite of the eggs. The hollandaise was warm, tart, and rich. The egg was perfectly poached. I closed my eyes. A sound, half sob, half gasp, escaped my throat. I was starving. I ate. I didn't stop. I ate like a desperate animal. With a single-minded, frantic hunger, I ate the eggs, the salmon, the fruit, 2 pastries. I drank an entire glass of orange juice. Rowan didn't speak. He just drank his coffee, looking out the window, giving me the dignity of not being watched. Finally, I set the fork down. I was full, not just full, but warm from the inside out. The persistent, low-level shiver that had been my constant companion for weeks was gone. The silence in the room settled. Heavier now. The food was gone. The reckoning was here. Rowan turned his full attention to me. The pained look was gone, replaced by that focused, diamond-hard intensity. There was no judgment. There was no pity. It was the face of a man who needed facts. "Tell me everything," he said. I had rehearsed a version of this for the lawyers I couldn't afford. A neat, tidy list of injustices. But sitting in a $500 a night hotel room, swaddled in a robe, my stomach full for the first time, the facade broke. I told him. I told him about the cold dining room, the thunk of the clock, and Kat's smooth, practiced lies about crypto. I told him about the neon-pink Steinway, and I watched his knuckles turn white as he gripped his coffee cup. I told him Sloane's words. I had to sand off all that old black lacquer. I told him about the attic, the key, the suffocating heat. I gave him the name. Aurora Meridian Capital, and the number. $700,000. I told him about the plan to use my mother's desecrated piano as collateral. I told him about my bank account. $417, the $10 gym membership, the rotation of parking lots, the 3:30 a.m. alarms in the dark, the irony of tutoring economics from the cab of a truck. I told him about Jerry's mistake burgers and the shame and gratitude of eating them. I told him about the cold snap. I told him about the heater core breaking. I told him about the shivering, the way it settled into my bones, the way I thought I was going to die in a Kroger parking lot. I told him about the 4 a.m. call to Olivia. I told him about the audio file, saved in 3 cloud accounts and an encrypted drive. I told him about the journal. I told him about the cheap plastic keyboard and the nocturne I played with headphones in the dark. I spoke for an hour, my voice flat, cold, and precise. I didn't cry. I had burned past tears weeks ago. I gave him every detail, right down to the thin, high-pitched whistle of the wind as it cut through the broken door seal of the Ford Ranger. When I finished, the sun was fully up, washing the city in a flat, morning light. Rowan was silent. He stood, walked to the window, and stared down at the traffic 22 floors below. His back to me. His stillness was terrifying, a compressed spring. "She didn't just steal your inheritance," he said, his voice quiet, vibrating with a controlled rage that was far more frightening than shouting. She didn't just desecrate her sister's memory. He turned to face me, and his eyes were cold. She left you to die, in a parking lot, in a truck with a broken heater, over money. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. You did well, he said, his voice suddenly brisk. You survived. You were smart. You gathered evidence. That part is over. He strode to the desk and picked up his smartphone. You are not going back to that diner. You are not going back to your friend's sofa. You're staying here. Rowan, I can't. I'm calling my lawyers, he said, cutting me off. He was already tapping the screen. This is not a family drama. Cora, this is not a dispute. This is a 5-alarm fire. We are going to handle this according to the rules. We are going to take her apart, piece by methodical piece, with the full weight of the law. Rowan did not wait. He picked up the hotel phone, turned his back to the window, and made the call. Marion, he said, his voice low and immediate. I have one. It is bad, and it is family. He paused, listening. No, mine. We were in the offices of Langford Hale LLP by 9 a.m. I was wearing clothes that had been delivered to the hotel an hour earlier by a silent assistant. Simple black trousers, a cream silk blouse, new leather flats. They felt like a costume, a suit of armor I hadn't earned, my diner uniform, which I had left in a sodden pile on the marble floor of the hotel bathroom, was gone. The law office was a world of glass, brushed steel, and silent, directed energy. It was designed to convey power, to make clients feel secure and opponents feel small. We were shown into a conference room with a view that matched the hotel's, the entire city spread out below us. Marion Langford did not enter the room. She materialized. She was perhaps in her late 60s, with a severe, perfectly cut bob of silver hair. She wore a dark navy blue dress that looked impossibly expensive. No jewelry save for a thin, practical watch. She moved with a quiet, unhurried grace. She shook Rowan's hand, then turned to me. Her handshake was firm, her skin cool. Ms. Sanders, Cora, she said. Her voice was the most remarkable thing about her. It was low, resonant, and possessed a preternatural calm. It was a voice that could soothe a panicked witness or surgically dissect an opposing counsel. It was, I thought, exactly like a scalpel wrapped in velvet. Rowan has given me the broad strokes, she said, sitting at the head of the massive table. She did not open a legal pad or turn on a laptop. She simply folded her hands and watched me. He said you were methodical. He said you have evidence. I need you to be methodical now. Tell me. This was not the confession from the hotel room, the one that had poured out of me in a torrent of hunger and exhaustion. This was the report. I laid out the facts. My voice as flat and cool as hers. The terms of my father's trust. The meeting in the dining room. Kat's claim of crypto losses. The precise number I had overheard, $700,000. The name, Aurora Meridian Capital. Then, I opened the backpack I had carried out of Olivia's apartment, the one that held my entire life. I took out the new, encrypted flash drive. I slid it across the polished wood table. It stopped directly in front of her. This is my evidence, I said. Marion inserted the drive into her laptop. What am I looking at? It is organized into 5 tabs, I said, my voice feeling distant, as if someone else were speaking. Tab 1 is an audio file. It is 30 seconds long. It is a recording of my stepmother, Catherine Hollis, admitting to the transfer of $700,000 from my trust, calling it seed money for her venture capital fund, Aurora Meridian Capital. She also confirms her intent to liquidate other assets, including a piano. Marion inserted a single, discreet earbud. She listened. Her expression did not change, but a single, perfectly groomed eyebrow rose 0.5 centimeter. That was all. She clicked to the next tab. Tab 2 is my journal, I continued. It is a contemporaneous log of every interaction since the day of the initial meeting. Dates, times, direct quotes, It also details my living situation. Tab 3. My financials. Every pay stub from my 2, later 3, jobs, my bank statements, showing my balance before Rowan's arrival, my work schedules. This establishes, irrefutably, my hardship and my forced separation from my education. Tab 4. Photographs of the Steinway piano, a before picture from 2 years ago, and multiple after pictures, taken the day of the meeting, close-ups of the neon paint, the vinyl stickers, and the sanded-down wood that her daughter, Sloane, bragged about. For the first time, Marian paused. She zoomed in on the picture of the Good Vibes Only sticker, its edges peeling over the piano's ruined hinge. "This," she said, her voice losing its velvet and exposing the steel beneath, "is illustrative of intent. It's not just theft, it's malice. A jury would despise this. It's an act of erasure." She looked up from the screen, her eyes locking on mine. "This is a very strong start. What's tab 5? "My research, my notes on the trust's original fiduciary clauses, the names of the lawyers I was investigating before Rowan arrived." Marian nodded. A quick, sharp gesture. She removed the earbud. "Excellent. We have the why and the how from your own lips. Now we need the where." She turned to Rowan. "Our strategy must be immediate. We cannot proceed with standard discovery. They are actively liquidating. We file for an emergency ex parte hearing. We need 2 things: an immediate, temporary freeze on all known assets belonging to Catherine Hollis and the trust, and an order compelling a full, immediate forensic audit." "Ex parte?" I asked. "The term foreign." "One-sided," Marian said. "We go to the judge before they know we're coming. We present the audio file, the journal, and the financial hardship. We argue that if we notify them, they will move the remaining assets beyond our reach. The audio proves they have the intent to conceal. The piano proves they have the malice. We give the judge no choice." The next 72 hours were a white-hot blur. I was moved from the Rook House to a secure, furnished corporate apartment downtown. I called Olivia. "Liv, I'm safe. I'm with my uncle. I can't explain everything, but it's being handled." Her shriek of relief was so loud, I had to pull the phone from my ear. Marian's team, a group of young, sharp-eyed associates who moved like sharks and seemed to subsist on cold brew and adrenaline, descended. They put me in a glass-walled conference room we came to call the Fishbowl, and a team of forensic accountants began to build a world. They took my single data point, Aurora Meridian Capital, and tore it open. We found it. The lead accountant, a man named Sal, said on the second day. He was pointing to a complex flowchart on a massive screen. "Aurora Meridian is real, registered in Delaware, but it wasn't funded by the trust, not directly." My heart sank. "So the audio?" "No. The audio was perfect. It gave us the what. We just had to find the how. She's clever, but not original." He pointed to 3 boxes on the chart. "She washed it. She created 3 shell companies: Vanguard Ridge LLC, Meridian Sun Group, Palisade North Ventures. The names were meaningless, corporate noise. She would authorize a transfer from your trust to Vanguard Ridge, citing diversification into private equity. Vanguard would then hold for a week and invest that capital in Meridian Sun. Meridian Sun would bundle it with other questionable assets and sell that bundle to Palisade North. Palisade North, now 3 steps removed from you, would make the seed capital investment in Aurora Meridian Capital." "Textbook money laundering," Rowan said, his voice a low growl. "Exactly," Sal said. "We matched your $700,000 from the audio file. It went through that exact cycle. But we found more. Once she'd tested the system, she did it again, a transfer of $150,000, just last month. $850,000. The total number she had claimed vanished in crypto. She hadn't lost it. She had stolen it, dollar for dollar. We filed the motion. The clerk at the Ardell County Courthouse stamped it, And the emergency hearing was set, but we had underestimated Kat's paranoia, or perhaps the loyalty of her golf partner lawyer, Alan Dempsey. Somehow, they were tipped off. The counterattack was not financial, it was personal, it was vicious. A petition landed on Marion's desk. "They're seeking a temporary restraining order," Marion said, her voice utterly devoid of emotion as she read the filing. "Against you, Rowan." "On what grounds?" Rowan asked, his jaw tightening. "That you are a disgruntled, estranged relative who is exercising undue influence over your clearly unstable niece, that you have effectively kidnapped me." I read the words, my blood running cold. They were painting me as a lunatic. They used my leave of absence from graduate school, the leave I was forced to take because they stole my money, as proof that I was suffering a mental breakdown and prone to fantasy. My poverty, my 3 jobs, my truck, they painted it all as a symptom of my instability. "This is filth," I whispered, my hands shaking. "It is predictable filth," Marion corrected, her voice sharp, pulling me back from the edge. "And it is a gift. They just committed their defense to paper, and we are going to dismantle it." She was already on the phone. "Get me Dr. Alan Reed. Yes, the forensic psychiatrist. I need an emergency evaluation and a report. Today." 3 hours later, I was in a quiet, sterile office, speaking to a man with kind, tired eyes. I told him everything, not just the theft, but my systems, the parking lot rotation, the $10 gym membership, the coded cloud backups, the ledger of my tips from the diner. By 6 p.m., Marion had his report. She attached it to our rebuttal. "Dr. Reed's professional opinion," she read, "is that Ms. Sanders displays no signs of psychosis or delusion. On the contrary, she is highly competent, organized, and her actions demonstrate advanced executive function under extreme duress. She is, in his opinion, a classic, high-functioning victim of complex financial and psychological abuse." The unstable narrative was dead. "But they gave us another gift," Marion said, a thin, dangerous smile touching her lips. "In their haste, they attached their primary defense exhibit. It's a waiver, an authorization, supposedly signed by you, giving Kat full discretionary power to invest in high-risk, non-traditional assets, crypto, venture capital, you name it." She slid the paper across the table. I looked at it. It was my name. It was my looping, cursive signature. But it was wrong. It was too careful. It was too slow. It was the signature of someone drawing, not writing. "That's not my signature," I said. "I never signed that." "I didn't think so," Marion said. "I already sent a high-resolution scan to Dr. Eliza Noor." Dr. Noor's report came back the next morning, less than an hour before the hearing. It was definitive. "The signature on the waiver is a forgery," Marion said, her voice ringing with a cold, triumphant finality. "Dr. Noor identifies it as a simulation. It was traced or copied. It exhibits tremors, hesitations, and unnatural pen lifts inconsistent with all known, fluid exemplars of your signature. They hadn't just stolen the money. They had faked my name to cover the crime." We walked into Judge Hernandez's chambers for the hearing. Kat was there, looking pale but composed in a cream-colored suit. Her lawyer, Dempsey, looked smug. He immediately launched into the unstable girl, greedy uncle narrative. Judge Hernandez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman from Ardell County, held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I have read your motion, Mr. Dempsey. It is creative. Ms. Langford, your response?" Marion stood. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply placed a single, thick, 5-tab binder on the judge's desk. "Your Honor," Marion said, her voice cutting through the room, "we can dispense with the family drama. This is a simple case of embezzlement, supported by forgery." She walked the judge through the binder, her voice a relentless, factual drumbeat. Tab 1. A full forensic audit trail. It charts $850,000 moving from Miss Sanders' trust, through 3 shell companies: Vanguard Ridge, Meridian Sun, and Palisade North. Tab 2. The formation documents for those shell companies, and the bank records showing the subsequent transfer of those exact funds into our defendant's personal venture capital fund, Aurora Meridian Capital. Kat's composure cracked. Her face went white. She grabbed Dempsey's arm. Tab 3, Marion continued, is a file on this flash drive. It is an audio recording, Your Honor, in which Ms. Hollis admits to the initial $700,000 transfer, calling it seed money and confirming her intent to conceal her actions. The judge looked up, her gaze like ice. Did you know about this, counselor? Dempsey's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Tab 4. The report from Dr. Eliza Noor, a court-certified handwriting expert, which confirms the signature Ms. Hollis is relying on for her entire defense, is a forgery. And Tab 5, Marion finished, is a collection of photographs detailing my client's living conditions for the past 4 months, pay stubs, schedules, and photographs of what Ms. Hollis's daughter did to my client's mother's piano, just to illustrate the level of contempt we are facing. Judge Hernandez stared at the picture of the neon pink Steinway for a full 10 seconds. Her face hardened. She looked at the forgery report. She looked at Kat. She picked up her gavel. The court finds, Judge Hernandez said, her voice filling the small room, that there is significant, compelling, and frankly disturbing evidence of gross fiduciary malfeasance, fraud, and unjust enrichment. The emergency motion is granted. All assets of the trust, all assets of Catherine Hollis, and all assets of the entity Aurora Meridian Capital are hereby frozen, effective immediately. The gavel cracked, a sharp, final sound, like a bone breaking. We stood, we walked out of the chambers. My knees were shaking. Rowan put a steadying hand on my shoulder. We didn't speak until we were in the elevator, the brass doors sliding shut, enclosing us in silence. That was your work, Cora, Rowan said quietly, looking at our reflection. Your journal, your audio file, your refusal to break? He looked at me. His eyes, my mother's eyes, no longer assessing, but proud. This is just a logic problem with spikes. We just pulled the biggest one. Now, we let the evidence do the talking. I nodded, the elevator doors opening into the bright, sunlit lobby. I'll say little, I whispered, the words tasting like a vow. So the truth sounds loud. The settlement conference was not held in a courtroom. Judge Hernandez had ordered it, but it was to take place on neutral ground, in the largest conference room at Langford Hale, a space on the 40th floor that felt less like an office and more like a pressurized airlock. The table was a single, massive slab of polished granite, cold to the touch. The air was chilled, recycled, and silent. We were there first, me, Rowan, and Marion Langford. We sat on one side of the expanse of stone. I had my hands folded in my lap. Rowan sat like a statue, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway. Marion was arranging 3 documents in a precise, geometric alignment in front of her, not the binder. The binder was on the credenza behind her, a thick, white, 5-tabbed weapon, waiting. The door opened. They were late. Kat entered first, a performance of confidence. She wore a winter-white suit, and on her wrist, a thick, jangly set of diamond bracelets that announced her arrival before she spoke. She was trying to project wealth, stability, control. It was a costume, just as my new clothes were, but hers was designed to intimidate. Behind her, her lawyer, Alan Dempsey. He looked stressed, his face puffy, his eyes darting around the room, settling on Marion with a look of pure resentment. And behind him, the children. Brent slouched in, his suit rumpled, and he punctuated his entrance with a loud, jaw-cracking yawn. He was bored. Sloane was last, her face hidden behind a curtain of blonde hair, her thumbs already flying across the screen of her phone. She didn't look up. She found a chair, sat, and continued to scroll. They were a portrait of oblivious arrogance. They settled opposite us, the granite plain between us feeling like a no man's land. Dempsey cleared his throat, shuffling a thin stack of papers. "Well," he began, his voice attempting a jovial, "let's get this over with" tone. "We're all busy people. My client is prepared to negotiate a reasonable resolution to this family misunderstanding, and of course, to discuss the terms of our countersuit for defamation and harassment, contingent on today's outcome." Rowan's jaw tightened. Marion's expression did not flicker. She simply looked at him, her gaze as flat and cold as the tabletop. Before Marion could speak, Kat leaned forward, placing her manicured hands on the granite. She deployed the smile, the one I'd seen in the dining room, the one of forced poisonous maternalism. "Cora," she said, her voice a syrupy, wounded coo. "This is all so unnecessary. I only ever wanted what was best for you. Your father would be heartbroken to see you letting Rowan twist things this way." I said nothing. I just looked at her. My silence was a wall she hadn't anticipated. She begged me," Kat continued, turning her performance to Marion. "She was the one who was impatient. She came to me after her undergrad, wanting fast growth. She kept hearing about crypto and all those tech startups. She wanted a high-risk portfolio. I was only trying to honor her wishes. And when the market turned, well, it was a tragedy for both of us." The lie was breathtaking. It was so complete, so audacious, that it hung in the silent, chilled air of the room like a physical object. Brent nodded in agreement, as if remembering this fiction. Sloane continued to scroll. Dempsey picked up his cue. "Exactly. A simple case of investor's remorse. Ms. Langford, my client was operating under verbal authorization." Marion Langford finally moved. She held up a single, pale hand. The motion was so slight, yet so absolute, that Dempsey stopped mid-word. "Mr. Dempsey," she said, her voice the velvet-wrapped scalpel. "We will dispense with the fiction. I am not here to negotiate. I am here to present the terms of surrender." She stood, turned, and retrieved the thick, white binder from the credenza. She placed it in the center of the table and slid it across the granite. It stopped perfectly in front of Alan Dempsey. His eyes widened at its thickness. "You may want to open that," Marion said, her voice quiet. "I believe you've been operating with incomplete information." Dempsey looked at Kat, who gave a slight, irritated shrug. He opened the cover. "Please turn to tab 1, Marion instructed, her voice that of a lecturer. "What you will find there is a full forensic accounting trace. It details the movement of $850,000 from Cora's trust. You will note it did not go into a crypto wallet." Dempsey's eyes scanned the first page, a complex flowchart. His face began to lose its ruddy confidence. "Now please see tab 2, Marion continued, her rhythm picking up. "There you will find the formation documents for 3 shell corporations, Vanguard Ridge, Meridian Sun, and Palisade North. You will see the money routed through each of them, a classic laundering technique to obscure its origin. And finally," she said, "tab 3. This is the one I believe you'll find most instructive. This tab contains the bank records and wiring instructions showing that entire $850,000 being deposited as seed capital directly into your client's personal venture capital fund, the one, I believe, she calls Aurora Meridian Capital." Dempsey's face went from pink to a sickly, mottled gray. He looked at Kat, his expression one of dawning, catastrophic horror. "Catherine," he whispered, "what is this?" Kat's smile was gone, frozen in place. It's a co-investment. It's complicated." "It is very simple," Marion said, her voice cutting through Kat's. "But please, don't take my word for it. Let's move to tab 4. Marion reached into her own briefcase and produced a small, sleek digital audio player and a portable speaker. She pressed a button. The sound that filled the sterile, silent room was my own, from months ago, shaky and thin. "The fund. It has severely underperformed." And then, Kat's, tinny, distorted, but unmistakably hers. The voice from the attic, dripping with bored arrogance. She doesn't need to know the specifics. The fund was a lifesaver. Aurora Meridian Capital would never have gotten off the ground without that seed money. That $700,000 was the only way. Brent's head snapped up. His face was white. His mouth fell open. By the time Cora turns 28, the trust will be dissolved. The assets will be fully integrated, and it will all be done. There will be nothing left for a lawyer to find. Kat lunged, her hand with its diamond bracelets extended, as if to physically snatch the words from the air. "Turn that off! That's illegal! You can't—" "I need the appraisal documents for the Steinway. I'm listing it as a corporate asset. It's still appraised at over 6 figures. Marion pressed the button. Silence flooded the room, heavier and more complete than before. Sloane had finally looked up from her phone. Her face was ashen. And Brent, in a single, spastic motion, dropped his own phone. It hit the granite table with a loud, sickening crack, the sound of glass shattering. Kat was breathing in short, shallow gasps. The blood had drained from her face, leaving a waxy, pale mask. Her lipstick looked garish, a slash of red on a corpse. "That was a deepfake," she stammered, her eyes wild. That wasn't me?" "It has been voice-printed and verified. Catherine," Marion said, her voice now completely devoid of warmth, "and it was obtained legally by a party to the conversation, which, as I'm sure Mr. Dempsey can tell you, is irrelevant given that it was captured in a state of no expectation of privacy by my client. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you still wish to pursue your verbal authorization defense." She pointed to the binder. "Please turn to tab 5. Dempsey's hands were shaking now. He fumbled with the tab. Turning the page, there, in a clear plastic sleeve, was the waiver, the one with my forged signature. "You are claiming my client authorized this risk," Marion said. "This is your proof, and this," she slid a second, thinner document across the table, "is the report from Dr. Eliza Noor, a board-certified forensic handwriting analyst." Dempsey's eyes scanned the page. "The signature is a simulation, a forgery. Exhibits, unnatural pen lifts, hesitations, tremors consistent with tracings." He dropped the report as if it had burned him. He looked at Kat, his professional life flashing before his eyes. He had been prepared to suborn perjury. He had been lied to, catastrophically. "Catherine," he hissed, his voice a strangled whisper. "You forged her name." The room was silent. The power had shifted. It had not just moved. It had cascaded. A tidal wave of truth that had left them shipwrecked. Marion Langford folded her hands. The trial was over. Now came the sentencing. "Here are our terms," she said, her voice clear and non-negotiable. "They are final. 1. The immediate and full return of the stolen principal, $850,000. 2. Punitive damages, to cover my client's hardship, lost educational opportunities, and emotional distress, $500,000, for a total payment of $1.35 million, to be wired within 24 hours. 3. The immediate and forced liquidation of all assets within the entity known as Aurora Meridian Capital. To satisfy this judgment, what remains, if anything, will be for the state to attach. 4. The immediate sale of the house in Ridgeview. The proceeds, after this judgment is met, will be held in escrow. And 5, Marion said, her eyes finding mine for a moment, the full and immediate return of all personal effects belonging to Daniel Sanders and the late Alara Sanders, every photograph, every piece of furniture, every letter, and most especially, the Steinway piano. Dempsey was staring, slack-jawed. Kat was a statue of pure, silent panic. "Mr. Dempsey," Marion said, "you look like you need a moment. I suggest you take one." Dempsey scrambled to his feet. "Recess," he choked out. We need to confer." He grabbed Kat's arm, pulling her from the chair. Brent and Sloane followed. like two pale, confused ghosts, Brent stopping only to scoop up his shattered phone. The door clicked shut, leaving us in the victorious, sterile silence. Rowan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since he walked into the diner. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "You did it, Cora." "Marion did it," I whispered, my voice thick. "No," Marion said, not looking up from her papers. "The truth did it. We just gave it a binder." They were gone for exactly 22 minutes. When the door opened again, they were a broken force. Dempsey was ashen, his tie askew. Kat's face was blotchy, her eyes red. The diamond bracelets were gone, stuffed into her purse. She was no longer performing. "My client, we accept the terms," Dempsey said, his voice a monotone of defeat. He couldn't even look at Marion. He was speaking to the table. We accept all terms, with one request, that, given this settlement, that Ms. Sanders agrees not to pursue, not to press criminal charges." It was a pathetic, desperate plea, begging for mercy after showing none. Marion Langford smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen her do it, and it was the most terrifying expression I had ever witnessed. It was a cold, sharp, predatory baring of teeth. "Oh, Mr. Dempsey," she said, her voice full of a terrible, false sympathy. "My client is a civilian. She will not be pressing any charges. She has no interest in that." A flicker of desperate hope lit Kat's eyes. "The district attorney's office, however," Marion continued, her smile vanishing, "is already in possession of this binder. We filed it with them this morning. This settlement is a civil matter. It is about making my client whole, the state's interest. That is an entirely separate issue. They will be reviewing the forgery, the wire fraud, and the embezzlement. My client has already agreed to cooperate fully with their investigation." Kat made a small, strangled sound in the back of her throat. Marion slid the settlement agreement, 2 copies, across the table. "Sign." Dempsey nudged the paper in front of Kat. She picked up the pen, her hand shaking so violently that her signature was not a signature at all. It was a jagged, angry scratch, a violation of the paper, her last, impotent act of rage. As she was signing the second copy, I spoke. It was the first time my voice had been heard in the room since the meeting began. "One more thing," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room, silencing the rustle of papers. Kat looked up, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost blue-white. "The Steinway," I said, my voice perfectly level. "It is not to be returned as is. It is to be sent to Northbridge Atelier, at your expense. It will be fully restored to its original, pre-sanded, pre-painted condition. Whatever the cost, that is the term." Kat's eyes widened. It was the final, precise twist of the knife. Not just the money, the memory, the restoration. She said nothing. She just slammed the pen down on the table. Marion nodded. "Consider the addendum noted. We are done here." We stood up, Rowan, Marion, and me. We left them there, sitting in the cold, silent room, with the wreckage of their lives and the shattered phone on the granite table. We walked out of the conference room. The hallway was on the west side of the building, and the late morning sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. A flood of brilliant, warm light. It hit my face, and I stopped. I felt Rowan's hand on my back, steady. I took a breath. It was the first one. The first breath in 4 months that didn't feel constricted. It didn't snag on the cold of the truck cab, or the exhaustion of the diner, or the raw fear of the future. It was a full, deep, clean breath that went all the way down, and it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt at all. The wire transfer was silent, invisible. It didn't land in my account with a crash. It just appeared. $1.35 million. The number was so large it felt like a clerical error, an abstraction. It didn't feel like money. It felt like a weight, a responsibility that settled on my shoulders. My first act was not to buy a car or new clothes. It was to leave Olivia's sofa. "I don't know how to thank you." "Liv," I said, my hand on the doorknob of her small studio. "You'd have done it for me," she said, pulling me into a hug that was fierce and real. "Just don't go back to eating mistake burgers." "I promise," I said, my voice thick. I found a studio apartment 2 blocks from the Whitcomb Institute, the graduate school I was supposed to be attending. It was small, on the 4th floor, with a clean wood floor and a big window that faced west. The first night, I lay on a new mattress, still on the floor, and listened. The silence was absolute. No rumble of a Walmart truck, no hiss of the Planet Fitness showers, no thrum of anxiety from Olivia sleeping 10 feet away. It was just the sound of my own breathing, in my own space. I had paid the deposit and 6 months' rent in advance, just to know it was mine. I re-enrolled at Whitcomb, my focus, nonprofit management. The second act was to understand the money. Rowan had established a new, ironclad trust, but he insisted I be his equal partner. Our first quarterly meeting was not in a cold dining room. It was in a bright, functional office at his hotel. "This," he said, tapping a spreadsheet, "is what your father wanted. It's boring, and boring is good." There was no crypto. There were no high-risk tech stocks. It was a portfolio of municipal bonds, broad market low-fee index funds, and treasury bills. "The expense ratio on this Vanguard fund is 0.04%, I said, reading the prospectus, "and the turnover is low." Rowan looked at me, a flicker of a smile in his eyes. "You're reading the prospectus." "I'm reading every word," I said. "I want to know where every dime is. Who's the custodian? What are the fees? What's the risk profile?" This was not the girl who had been threatened with litigation costs. I was no longer a supplicant. I was an owner. We established the new rules, the 3 layers of protection my father's original trust had lacked. 1, a fully independent advisor, Rowan, who had no stake in the fund's management firms. 2, dual key authorization. No sum over $5,000 could be moved from the principal without both my signature and his. 3, a mandatory, independent annual audit from a firm that had no connection to either of us. The system was now built on verification, not blind trust. The money was secure. The trauma was not. My health insurance was active. I continued my sessions with Dr. Reed, the forensic psychiatrist Marion had hired. They were no longer about proving my sanity for a legal rebuttal. They were about rebuilding it. "The nightmares are still there," I told him in our 3rd session. "I'm in the truck. It's cold. The engine won't turn over. I wake up, and my heart is hammering, and I'm checking the locks on my apartment door." "It's a textbook trauma response, Cora," he said, his voice calm and even. "Your brain is still stuck in survival mode. You spent months in a state of high alert. It doesn't just turn off. We have to teach it that the war is over." We worked through it, cognitive behavioral therapy. When the panic rose, I didn't fight it. I acknowledged it. I am not cold. I am in my apartment. The heater is working. My bank account is secure. I am not in the truck. The nightmares began to fade. They didn't vanish, but they lost their power. They became fuzzy, like a bad movie I'd seen a long time ago. One afternoon, I was walking past an antique shop and heard the deep, heavy thunk of a grandfather clock from inside. I flinched, my hand instinctively going to my pocket for a phone that wasn't there. But the panic didn't come. The thunk was just a sound. It was just a clock, telling time. It was not a hammer, falling on my life. The next week, I sent a package to Olivia. It was a small box. Inside was a reservation for a 4-night stay at a spa resort in Arizona, and 2 first-class plane tickets. The note I'd included was simple. "Liv, here are 4 nights in a real bed. I can personally guarantee this hotel has absolutely no black mold. Thank you for saving my life." The most symbolic piece of the wreckage was the last to be addressed. I called Northbridge Atelier, the finest restoration house in the state. I paid for the specialists, the climate-controlled truck. I watched from my window as they loaded the neon-pink monstrosity, still wrapped in its good vibes only stickers. It looked like a joke, a tragic piece of pop art garbage. I met the head artisan, a man named Mr. Elias, at their workshop. He was an older German man who looked at the piano with a quiet, profound sadness. He ran a gentle hand over the place where Sloane had sanded the ebony lacquer away. "The paint is an insult," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But this sanding, this was violence, to remove the original finish. This is not mischief. This is a purposeful destruction of its soul." "Can you fix it?" I asked. He looked at me over his glasses. "We are not fixing it. Ms. Sanders, we are resurrecting it. It will take time. The new lacquer must be applied in 22 thin layers. Each must cure, the strings, the action. It is all compromised by the paint particulate." "How long?" "6 months," he said. "At least, and the cost. It will be significant." "The cost is not an issue," I said. "It is being covered by the woman who did this." I returned to my life. I quit Dawnline Roasters with a polite, 2-sentence email. I finished my last tutoring session. I had to pay back the sleep debt I owed my own body. For the first 2 weeks in my new apartment, I did nothing but attend classes and sleep. I slept 10, sometimes 12 hours a night. I was letting my nervous system, my muscles, my mind, finally come off the battlefield. One afternoon, I went back to the Bluebird Diner. It was the middle of the day, bright and almost empty. I sat in a booth, not at the counter. A new waitress, someone I didn't know, took my order. I just asked for a coffee. It was still terrible. Jerry was in the kitchen, leaning over the pass. He saw me, and his eyebrows shot up in surprise. I finished the coffee, paid the bill. I walked over to the pass, and Jerry looked at me, wiping his hands on his apron. "Heard you quit? Sanders, you win the lottery or something?" I smiled. "Something like that." I pulled an envelope from my backpack. "This is for you. Jerry." He looked at it, suspicious. "What is it?" "It's my gratitude. For all the mistake burgers, you kept me from starving." He opened it, and his jaw dropped. Inside was a cashier's check for $500. "Cora, I can't take this." "Yes, you can," I said. "Call it a tip for services rendered. Thank you, Jerry, for everything." I walked out before he could argue, but I kept one thing. It wasn't the $100 bill from Rowan. It was my final paycheck stub from the Bluebird, the one from the week I had collapsed, the net pay, $321.50. I put it in a simple black frame and stood it on my new desk. It was my relic. It was my reminder of the bottom. It was the proof of what I had survived. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a student, and I was learning. My studies in nonprofit management were no longer theoretical. I was not just reading case studies. I was becoming one. I spent my nights in the library, not tutoring, but drafting. I was writing a proposal. I was designing a new kind of organization, a rapid response fund for students who find themselves in my exact position. Students who fall through the cracks of traditional aid. Students whose family support is not just withdrawn, but weaponized against them. A fund that could provide immediate emergency housing, a grant for a broken-down car, a stipend for food, and most importantly, emergency legal counsel. It needed a name. I thought of my father. His trust was a promise. It was a promise Kat had stolen and twisted. This was my chance to reclaim it. I typed the title on the cover page, The Sanders Promise Foundation. I showed the 30-page proposal to Rowan at our next meeting. He read it silently, his expression unreadable. He read every line, every budget projection. When he finished, he closed the binder and looked at me, a long, quiet moment passing between us. "You won a battle, Cora," he said, his voice quiet. "A necessary, brutal battle. But this is different. You're building an ecosystem, so others don't have to fight that battle alone." I nodded, the words tasting right, true. "I'm turning the rage into policy," I said. She thought I'd be resilient. She was right, but she never imagined this is what resilience looks like. It took 6 months. 6 months of classes, of building the foundation's framework, of sleeping in a real bed. The call from Mr. Elias came on a Tuesday. "It is ready," he said, his voice holding a quiet reverence. It arrived not in a van, but in a large, climate-controlled truck. It was encased in a custom-built wooden crate. Mr. Elias and two technicians in white gloves wheeled it into my studio apartment on a specialized dolly. The apartment was suddenly very small. "We will unseal it here," Mr. Elias said. Rowan and Olivia were with me, standing by the window. The room was silent as the technicians used power drills to remove the screws. The front panel of the crate was lifted away. It was black, a deep, impossible, liquid black. The light from my window hit its surface and seemed to fall into it. The garish pink, the vinyl stickers, the sanded-down wounds, they were gone. It was a Steinway again. Mr. Elias ran a gloved hand over the newly lacquered surface. 22 coats, hand-rubbed, the soundboard was intact. Thank God. We replaced the action, the hammers, all compromised by the paint particulate. I walked toward it, my hand outstretched, but I was afraid to touch it. I saw my own reflection in the surface, a warped, watery version of my face. "There is one thing," Mr. Elias said, his voice soft. He pointed to a spot on the curve of the body, near the keyboard. I bent closer. It was a scratch, a small, thin, horizontal line, about an inch long. It was deep, going past the new lacquer, past the veneer, into the wood itself. It was the only flaw on the entire perfect instrument. "The gouge was too deep," Mr. Elias said. "From the child's sanding, we could not remove it without compromising the structural integrity of the case. We filled it. We sealed it. But it is there." He looked at me, his eyes kind. "It is a scar. Ms. Sanders, it is part of its history now. We did not think it was our right to erase it completely. A scar, not a wound, a reminder of the violence, but a sign of the healing." I nodded, my throat too thick to speak. "Thank you, Mr. Elias. It's perfect." He and his team left. Rowan, Olivia, and I stood around the piano as if it were a sleeping giant. "Well," Olivia said, nudging me, "play it?" I sat on the bench. The new leather was firm. My hands, which had grown steady from serving coffee and typing grant proposals, felt clumsy. I looked at the keys. They were pristine. I thought of my cheap 49-key pawnshop keyboard. I thought of playing scales with headphones in the dark. I lifted my hands. I hesitated. Then, I let my fingers fall. The first chord was Chopin, the Nocturne in E-flat, my mother's favorite. The sound that rose up was not the tinny buzz from my headphones. It was not the dead clack of the pink-painted keys. It was a sound so warm, so rich and complex. It felt like a physical presence in the room. It was a bass note that resonated in my chest, and a high note that hung in the air like a crystal. It was the sound of my childhood. It was the sound of my mother's hands. Resting on my shoulders, I closed my eyes and played, the music filling the apartment, pouring out the open window, and washing away the last 6 months of silence. 2 weeks later, we held the first fundraiser for the Sanders Promise Foundation. It was not a gala. It was in a rented community space, with folding chairs and a buffet table of food donated by local restaurants. I stood at a small lectern. I looked out at the 50 or 60 people, local activists, university counselors, a few lawyers. I told my story, but I never used my name. "Imagine a student," I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified by a small microphone. "She's 22. Her education is fully funded by a family trust. One day, she's told the money is gone. Market volatility. Crypto. But the truth is, it was stolen by the person she trusted most. She has $400. Her rent is due. She's forced to drop out of school. She gets a job at a coffee shop, a diner. She sleeps in her truck in a Walmart parking lot. She gets sick, but she can't afford a doctor. She has the truth, but she can't afford a lawyer. I looked around the room. They were listening. They were not hearing a tragedy. They were hearing a systemic failure. The Sanders Promise Foundation, I said, is built to be the help that student needed. We are not a scholarship. We are a rapid response team. We provide emergency housing, legal aid, and trauma therapy for students who have been financially cut off as an act of family-based abuse. That night, we raised enough to fund our first year. The first grant we gave was not for tuition. It was for a 38-year-old woman, a mother of two, who had been cut off from her family's trust for leaving an abusive husband. We paid the security deposit on a new apartment and retained a lawyer for her. Our second grant was to a 20-year-old college student, kicked out and disowned, sleeping on a friend's floor. We got him into a university dorm and paid for a semester of groceries. We helped 38 students in that first year. The foundation grew. It was real. Olivia, with her fierce loyalty and razor-sharp organizational skills, came on as the first director of the Ardell County branch. Her first act was to partner with the Bluebird Diner. Jerry, who refused to take any more of my money, now donated 100 meal vouchers a month to our students. "No kid's gotta work 3 jobs to eat a real burger," he'd grumbled, his version of a heartfelt commitment. The Ardell County Chronicle ran a story. It was a full-page feature, with a picture of me, not at the piano, but in our tiny functional office. The reporter had asked me about revenge, about the people who had wronged me. I guided the conversation away from the personal. "This isn't about one family's drama," I said. The quote printed in bold. "It's about systemic failure. It's about how easily a trust structure can be abused. We're not just offering aid. We're pushing for financial literacy. We're teaching students and families how to build protective clauses, dual key authorizations, and mandatory audits into their estate planning. A promise is only as strong as the locks you put on it." The article ran on a Friday, the following Monday. An email appeared in my inbox. It was from a name I didn't recognize, a generic account. The subject line was just 2 words: Aurora Meridian. My blood went cold. I opened it. The body of the email was a single sentence. "She's moving the last of the money. Aurora Meridian is being liquidated, and the assets are being wired to an offshore entity. She's running." The civil settlement had frozen the known assets, but Kat, ever the predator, had apparently kept a hidden reserve, a rainy day fund from her other investors. Now that the DA was building a criminal case, she was preparing to flee. My hands were shaking, not with fear, with a cold, familiar rage. But this time, I knew what to do with it. I did not panic. I did not call Rowan. I forwarded the email to one person. Marion Langford. My note was shorter than the tipster's. "Marion, she's running. Attached is a new tip. Please forward to the district attorney's office immediately." I hit send. The wheels of justice, which had been grinding slowly, suddenly spun into high gear. This time, the news came not through lawyers, but through the public record. 2 days later, a call from Marion. "The DA's office got an emergency warrant based on your tip," she said, her voice brisk. "They've subpoenaed Kat for an immediate asset disclosure hearing. They're adding fraudulent conveyance to the list of potential charges." The ripples spread. A week later, I saw Brent's dark green sports car, the one he used to rev in the driveway, listed for sale on a used car website. "Must sell," the description said. "Price negotiable." They were liquidating, but not for a clean getaway. They were liquidating for legal fees. Then, the most satisfying, silent victory. I was doing research online and idly typed in Sloane's name, her Instagram, the one that had been the altar for my mother's piano, the one filled with aesthetic photos of her boss babe life, was gone. The link led to a blank, gray page. "Sorry, this page isn't available." She had been so public, so proud, and now she had vanished. I felt nothing, not joy, not satisfaction, not that hot, righteous thrill of schadenfreude. I had expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. And then I felt light. It was the absence of a weight I had been carrying for so long. I had mistaken it for a part of my own body. The anger, the need for them to pay, it had been a fuel, and now the tank was empty. I didn't need it anymore. That night, I sat at the piano. The scar on its side was visible in the lamplight. I ran my fingers over it. It was smooth, sealed, but forever a part of the instrument. I understood what Mr. Elias meant. I began to play. I played my mother's nocturne. I played the Bach inventions I'd practiced in my headphones. I played all the music I had used as a weapon, as a shield, as an act of defiance. But this time, it was different. I wasn't playing to remember. I wasn't playing to fight. I was just playing. The music was not for them. It was not for my mother. It was for me. I was letting the last of the cold, hard anger go, releasing it with the notes, letting it dissipate into the quiet of the night. From the hallway, I heard the faint, muffled thunk of my neighbor's grandfather clock. It was just a sound. It was just an echo from another life. I kept playing, the music warm and alive. The night was quiet, and the clock was just a clock, keeping the rhythm of a woman who was finally, completely free. The anonymous email had been blunt. Bluebird Diner, 3 a.m., Friday, if you want the rest of the story. I didn't go alone. I went with Rowan and Marion Langford. The diner was exactly as I remembered it, a pocket of fluorescent light in the pre-dawn darkness, the red neon open sign humming, casting wet, bloody reflections on the rain-slicked asphalt. We arrived at 2:45 a.m. Jerry was behind the counter, wiping down the stainless steel. He saw me and his face, usually a mask of permanent gruffness, softened. He just nodded once, then jerked his head toward the back booth, the one where I had hidden, scrubbing salt shakers. We slid into the vinyl. Marion sat facing the door. Rowan sat beside me. I sat where I had always sat, my back to the wall. I ran my fingers over the formica tabletop, and my nail caught in a small, familiar groove. It was the scratch from the heavy ceramic mug Rowan had used, the night he had laid down the $100 bill, the night my life had pivoted. The air was thick with the smell of old coffee and grease, a smell that had once been my life, but now just felt like a costume I had taken off. At 3 a.m. on the dot, the bell over the door chimed. It wasn't Kat. It was a young woman, maybe 25. She was pale, wearing a cheap raincoat, and looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes darted around the diner, wide with terror, until she saw me. She walked over, clutching a thin laptop bag to her chest as if it were a shield. It was Sarah, Kat's former executive assistant, the one who had always looked away when I'd come to the house. She slid into the booth opposite Marion. Her hands were shaking. I had to, she whispered, her voice trembling. I was on the ghost payroll. She paid me to keep quiet, to process the transfers. But when the DA called, I couldn't be a part of it anymore. Not after what she was planning. What she was planning, Sarah? Marion asked, her voice calm, a sharp contrast to the girl's panic. Sarah fumbled with the clasp on her bag. She pulled out a small, silver USB drive. She slid it across the table. It stopped next to the scratch. She was running. Tonight, she was liquidating the last of the Aurora funds, the ones the DA hadn't frozen, money from other partners. She was wiring it all to a shell in the Caymans. She was setting me up to take the fall for it. She'd put the final transfer authorizations in my name. What's on this drive? I asked, my voice low. Everything, Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The real payroll, the 8 ghost employees whose salaries were just being funneled back to her, the shadow loan agreements she'd made against the company's assets, and the wire confirmations for tonight's transfer. She's supposed to be on a plane at 6 a.m. The bell over the door chimed again. But this time, it wasn't a chime. It was a crash. The door slammed open, hitting the wall with a crack. Kat stood there. She was not in her usual polished, perfect suit. She was in expensive travel clothes, her hair pulled back, her face a mask of pure reptilian fury. And behind her, looking pale and sick, was Alan Dempsey. She hadn't seen us. Her eyes were locked on Sarah. "You!" Kat shrieked, her voice echoing in the small, silent diner. "You little rat! You think you can blackmail me? You think you can take my money and then sell me out?" She stormed toward the booth, her hand raised, ready to strike. "You were supposed to be at the airport. You were supposed to give me the drive and—" She stopped. She was 2 feet from the booth, her eyes, insane with rage, finally focused. She saw me. She saw Rowan, his face a mask of cold disgust, and she saw the calm, predatory smile on Marian Langford's face. Kat's blood drained from her face. Her raised hand froze, then slowly dropped to her side. Dempsey, behind her, looked like he was going to be physically ill. "What? What is this?" Kat stammered, her voice suddenly small. "Cora? What are you doing here?" "A trap, Catherine?" Marian asked, her voice conversational. She picked up the small silver USB drive, holding it between her thumb and forefinger. "Were you here to buy this from her? To silence her before you fled the country?" Kat's eyes darted to the drive, then to Sarah, then back to Marian. The animal cunning returned. "That's mine," she hissed. "That's proprietary company property. Give it to me. This is a shakedown." "You set me up!" Kat screamed, finding her voice again. It was the old familiar tactic. Accuse them of what you are guilty of. "You're all trying to extort me. That money, I was just protecting it. I was leveraging it. I was trying to save the fund." She took a step closer, her eyes locked on me, the hatred pure. "I just moved it temporarily. You stupid, ungrateful girl. If I hadn't, the whole fund would have been dead. It was already dead. I saved it. I saved you." It was the final, fatal admission. The confession my first audio file had only hinted at. The first recording proved the act. This one, here, in front of witnesses, proved the criminal intent. Marian Langford's smile vanished. "Thank you. Catherine, I was hoping you'd say that." Kat looked confused. "What?" Marian pointed. Not at a person. She pointed up, toward the corner of the diner, just above the pie case, where the old, dusty, fake security camera dome used to be. There was a new, sleek, black camera. A small red light glowed. What is that?" Dempsey whispered, his hand on his chest. "That, Mr. Dempsey," Marian said, her voice like ice, "is a court-authorized recording device, as is the microphone clipped to the menu holder on the counter. This entire diner has been a state-controlled wiretap for the past 12 hours, ever since Ms. Sarah here agreed to cooperate with the district attorney's office." Kat's face collapsed. It was not a slow deflation. It was a structural failure. "You just confessed," Marian continued, her voice a relentless, factual hammer, "on a live feed to the lead prosecutor, to willful intent to commit fraud, fraudulent conveyance, and conspiracy to flee prosecution. Your lawyer is a witness." Dempsey made a small gasping sound and stumbled back, clutching a countertop for support. Marian stood up, smoothing the front of her jacket. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a document. She slid it across the table. "Catherine Hollis, I am serving you with this. It is a temporary arrest warrant, signed by Judge Hernandez not 30 minutes ago, based on the evidence contained on this drive. The attempt to flee prosecution just added another 10 years to your sentence." Kat didn't even look at the paper. Her eyes, filled with a black, bottomless hatred, were fixed on me. "You," she whispered, the word a poison dart. "You did this. You, trash, living in a truck. You don't deserve that money. You never did. You are weak, just like your mother. You're going to waste it all. You're going to end up right back in the gutter." I stood up slowly. We were face to face, separated only by the Formica table. The smell of her expensive perfume, soured by panic, mixed with the diner's stale grease. My hands were not shaking. I was not the girl from the attic. I was not the girl in the parking lot. "You're wrong," I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the diner. It was stronger than her shriek. "I'm not wasting it. I'm using it to build the one thing you never could. An opportunity for someone else. I'm building a promise. You took my father's money to build an empty company. Kat, I'm using it to build a foundation. You take, I build. That's the difference." The bell chimed again. This time, it was two uniformed Ardell County police officers. They were large, calm, and looked like they'd done this 1,000 times. They stepped inside, their boots squeaking on the linoleum, and looked at our booth. Jerry just pointed. "Her?" "Catherine Hollis?" one of the officers said, his voice flat. "You're under arrest." That's when she broke. It was not a scream. It was a guttural, animal sound of pure, trapped rage. "No, get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? You can't do this." She twisted. She fought, her nails scratching at the officer's arm. Her diamond bracelet caught on his tactical vest, and the clasp snapped, the diamonds scattering across the dirty floor like tiny, meaningless pieces of ice. I turned away. I sat down, deliberately, on the other side of the booth, the side where Rowan had sat, the side that faced the diner. Not the wall. I didn't watch them cuff her. I didn't watch them drag her. Still struggling. Out the door. I didn't watch Alan Dempsey stammering about lawyers and phone calls. I heard a phone ringing. A frantic, insistent sound. Brent, no doubt, wondering why his mother wasn't at the airport. I heard a faint, high-pitched wail from the parking lot, and through the blinds, I saw a shape crumpled against the side of Kat's car. Sloane. Her final illusion of a perfect life dissolving in the pre-dawn rain. I did not watch. I just stared at my hands, resting on the formica. They were steady. Marion was already at the counter, handing the USB drive to a plainclothes detective who had entered with the officers. "Make 3 copies," she was saying, her voice crisp and professional. "One for the digital evidence lab, one for the prosecutor's file, one for us. The DA has confirmed the new charges: document fraud, conspiracy, and fraudulent asset transfer. The confession seals it." The diner was quiet again. The sirens were fading. Rowan slid into the booth opposite me. Jerry walked over. He looked tired. He placed a heavy ceramic mug in front of me. Black coffee, steaming. Then, he placed a small, white receipt from his notepad on the table. Rowan pushed it toward me. I looked down at it. In Jerry's rough pencil scrawl, it said, 1 black coffee. The total, $0, 0 cents. At the bottom, he had written 2 words. Dawn Ringer. I picked up the receipt, folding it carefully, and put it in my pocket. I stood up. I walked past the scattered diamonds, past the overturned chair. I pushed open the glass door and stepped out. The rain had stopped. The air was cold, clean, and sharp, and it smelled like a new day. The sky was no longer black. It was a deep, bruised purple, with a single, brilliant streak of pale gray in the east. The city was waking up. I walked across the parking lot, past the police cars, past Rowan's black Mercedes. At the far edge of the lot, parked under the buzzing neon sign, was my old Ford Ranger. I had kept it. I couldn't sell it. It was my scar, my reminder. Dew had collected on the hood, glistening in the first light. I leaned against the cold metal of the driver's side door, the same door I had crawled out of, sick and freezing, all those months ago. I pulled out my phone. The screen was bright in the dim light. I opened my messages to Olivia. I typed 2 words. "It's done." I hit send. I closed my eyes. I was not in the truck. I was standing beside it. I was not cold. I was not scared. I was free. And in my head, over the distant sound of the waking city, I heard the music, the first, warm, resonant notes of my mother's nocturne, rising up to meet the morning. The story was over, right where it had begun, at the Bluebird Diner, just after 3 a.m. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm curious, where in the world are you listening from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect. And please share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can find and hear this story.